Well, I think the first thing we need to consider is, is the UK well placed to do this sort of activity? In my sort of 25 years or so in the British military, I did peace enforcement and peacekeeping operations. British troops are ideally placed for this sort of activity. Now, with the way that the Trump administration is going about things and the very clear direction from President Trump that the security of Europe is Europe's problem, then countries like the UK must step up. So I think number one, I am in this particular case delighted that the Prime Minister is discussing peacekeeping, peace enforcement forces, and putting Britain to the front. And it's clear actually that Britain and France and the northern European countries, the Scandinavian countries, are keen to do this. Some of the others are a little bit reticent. But the key thing is, I think everybody wants peace in Ukraine as soon as possible to a deal that satisfies President Zelensky and the Ukrainian people.
Well, some people say that history repeats itself, and I certainly hope that it won't. But I'm not sure that what are the historical skills of Mr. Trump's team. Do they understand how crucial things are happening for the not only peace in Europe but also peace in globally? Because what kind of message do you really want to send to all the dictators of the world, including China? I think that the Ukrainians are ready to accept the peace, even where they lose temporarily some of the areas, but they are not willing to take a peace where they don't get real security guarantees. Troops on the ground, not a piece of paper with some ink, because they tried it in 1994, didn't work.
When it comes to that peace deal, there will need to be some sort of way to ensure the peace, a peacekeeping force, and the discussions of a buffer zone with a force led potentially by Britain on the command and control and providing forces to do it makes a lot of sense. However, it does open a lot of questions. This government and the previous government have really taken a lot of risk with our defence and sort of paid lip service with it since the end of the Cold War, which means that our military is very small, very hollowed out, short of equipment, and is underinvested.
On defence, it's clear the US is not going to leave NATO. But we Europeans will have to do more. The issue of burden sharing is not new, but it is now pressing. And Europeans will have to step up, both in terms of spending and the capabilities that we provide.
Whatever it's called, it will effect be a NATO mission, but minus US troops. It is important as well that it sort of is a NATO mission because, we're even hearing today from Lavrov, the foreign minister in the Kremlin in Moscow, that any NATO troops on the ground in Ukraine is something that the Russians would not welcome. Well, that's tough. The key thing about having NATO troops on the ground in Ukraine is that if Russia does attack them, then that would be an Article 5 event. That would be then NATO all in, which is why it's so important that we have NATO troops there. Force, and people are talking about 50,000, which, is probably a low number, I expect, given the absolute vast area to be covered. And that force will need to be able to pack a punch. Tanks, armour, artillery, drones, attack helicopters and fighter jets, again, to make it credible. Now, Britain can't provide all of that. We can certainly provide the command and control and some of the strike forces. But another thing that the Prime Minister's got to consider is how long we can do it for. We talk about, rather glibly in military terms, turn of the dice. And that dice needs to be turned about every 6 months because soldiers, that's in Britain's parlance, they only spend 6 months in the front line. I think we shouldn't get seduced with the numbers game here, because when you look at the numbers involved in this conflict, there are 600,000 or so on each side. So massive numbers. I think it's more about capability, what capability these troops have. And they need the ability to be able to survey the whole border, the whole area, And that's surveillance assets, be it satellites, drones, signals intelligence, image intelligence, human intelligence, etc., etc. You then need a force that can move very rapidly to hit any gaps, if you like, or any intrusions. And that is where you need, very mobile light forces, sort of paratroopers and others who can get there very, very quickly. But then you also need the armored grunt, if you like, the armored punch that can knock back any Russian tanks or whatever that do make an incursion. Now, that then gives a challenge when you've got tanks and infantry soldiers who need to cover an 800-mile zone. You can't cover every inch of the ground. So what they'll need is mobile combat teams of all these capabilities, perhaps positioned in key areas which can then react very quickly. So it depends what numbers that all adds up to. So a number of about 50,000 probably is realistic, and we've got to be realistic in this. NATO just doesn't have the resources to do much more than that. A force of 50,000 with the right intelligence assets and with the air power of America sitting in the background would probably be substantive enough to do the job of peace enforcement and peacekeeping across this border.
It's a 1,200 kilometers long ceasefire line. You would need 150 to 200,000 troops there, and then you have to rotate them. You need 3 times more. We don't have forces like that. And many Ukrainians have said they are much more, let's say, much more level-headed about that. They said that, well, instead of having huge mass of Western forces, the main burden should be in the Ukrainian army. We, the West, have to support Ukrainians so that they can rearm their army so that it is strong enough with modern Western technology so that they can be the main deterrence. And then, of course, some kind of presence from the Western countries. But yeah, they would be the main characters of their own peace. I'm happy because every day Ukrainians die. But it's better than giving Putin what he wants, because then not only Ukraine will fight, we will fight there too. So it's better to support Ukraine now so that we have a better result. And as I said, Russia can wage this war in this intensity not even a year. And after that, they can continue it a long time with low intensity, but it's hurting them. It's hurting the economy bad.
He and his government have got to spend appropriately on defence. And one of the main reasons we're in this position, there are 2 elements to it. First of all, when President Putin looked west on the 24th of February 2022, he didn't see a conventional deterrence, certainly not from the UK. And now that President Trump is very much focusing internally on the US and doesn't want to continue to spend a lot of money to defend Europe, and is saying that Europe needs to take up that gauntlet, that means that countries like Britain now need to spend a lot more on our defence to make it credible. And when it comes to a peacekeeping, peace enforcement force in Europe, very quickly, Britain will need to spend a lot of money on its defence, and also probably have to rely very strongly on our reserves, who are very large and capable, but pretty much unloved and under-resourced at the moment. We're spending 2.2% on defence at the moment, and nobody thinks that that's the right amount of money at all. The new government are talking about 2.5 when conditions allow. That is ridiculous. I would have thought a minimum of 3% of GDP at the moment, with a commitment to really spend what you need in order to provide a credible defence. And the new government must realise, they might not have been in power when Putin invaded, but defence and security is a collective responsibility. It shouldn't be single-party politics. And everybody has let the ball drop here.
Putin hasn't given up his ambitions. He's willing to sacrifice how many Russians is needed to get what he wants. So he still sticks to his guns on this issue. And now, if you make a deal with him, basically giving him everything he can wish for in this stage of the war, which has gone badly, it just makes his appetite bigger. It tells him that I'm on the right path. this is how I need to do. I just wage the war for a couple of years, sacrifice a couple 100,000 Russians. I have plenty of those, and the spineless West will give up, and I get what I want. I try to be optimistic. I try to hope for the best, that Americans understand what's good for them and good for Europe, but you never know. So we have a saying in Finland, pessimist ei pety, which means that the pessimist never gets disappointed. Winter will come, be prepared. So I think that that's the attitude you should have.